You know, I really like Symphogear. Like, I wouldn't be this invested in putting out a lot of videos about potential hypotheticals and scaling without at least liking it a little bit. However, what I find the most interesting about it isn't the cool fight scenes or transformations, but instead the hypotheticals about the series from a scaling standpoint. After all, the show teases us a lot with different interactions and potential fights throughout the series, so we end up with a ton of questions that could end up bringing this series to one of my favorite series to talk about and theorize. That and their actual keywords to tell us what things are, so scaling isn't completely up to interpretation and we actually have numbers for it. However, one of the aspects of Symphogear that wasn't really discussed throughout the series but is revered constantly throughout the fanbase would be the power level of Golden Transmutation, and it even has me curious as to exactly where this power lies. So today we'll be talking about Golden Transmutation and, more importantly, how strong Golden Hiiki really is. I didn't really go over it in the Hiiki video, but I'll get into why this is a video in and of itself. So with that being said, let's go Golden. Now, a lot of people will ask exactly why I would make this video when I've already made a comprehensive Hiiki scaling video and could have gone over it then. And to answer that question, I have two things to say. One, cry about it, you didn't make the video, you can make your own Hiiki scaling video. And two, Golden Transmutation is just really weird to go over as a form. If I were to give it a comparison, it would be the Symphogear equivalent of Lambda. Insert obligatory anime risk, Lambda scaling is hard reference here. Where people know about this form and how strong it is and is implied to have a higher potential from what we saw, but we only see it very briefly at the end of an arc, and then it's never spoken of again or elaborated on. So we end up getting into the same problem with Lambda, where there's such a minuscule amount of information about it and that everything we do pull up is basically assumptions. However, unlike Lambda, I'm able to go over this a bit more in depth thanks to guides. Golden Transmutation is an iffy subject for multiple reasons, but the two main reasons are that one, it's alchemy, which is a different power system than the Phonic game that the Symphogear users use, and two, it was primarily utilized as an actual move and technique rather than a transformation. The reason these two things matter is because this puts a bit into context as to what makes Golden Transmutation so weird to scale and bring up as a whole. Starting with reasoning numero uno, alchemy is a completely different power system than Phonic game, being something that's confirmed basically all throughout the series past GX, which is when we're introduced to the Autoscorers and Carol. For a brief explanation as to these two power systems, Phonic Gain, which is used by the Symphogear users, is a power that's manipulated by singing, which is coincidentally, it's not a coincidence, it's the entire gimmick of the show, why only the users have access to it. This allows for things such as unison to be something that can be used by any characters who use Phonic Gain, as well as the utilization of techniques like a climax song, which is another 5 times multiplier in power. However, alchemy is defined as many things, but the most consistent thing is that it's defined as the concept of deconstruction and reconstruction. This is primarily why characters like Carol are able to utilize the ultimate ability of Alkahest, which splits apart matter into the prime building block of the verse, being prima materia, as well as characters like Adam being able to transform attacks from the Symphogear users into ice to freeze them, as well as the Magical Girl incident with Saint Germain transforming people into energy. There are other explanations which explain other abilities of alchemy, such as Elf9's explanation of the incineration of memories, which manipulates electrical signals in the brain into raw power, but ultimately the concept of reconstruction is what makes alchemy different than Phonic Gain, which leads to the second reason. The second reasoning is that Golden Transmutation is ultimately used as a technique that fighters can attack and defend with, as we see with Adam, who introduces it, as well as Carol, who uses it to overpower Shemha. In both of these scenarios, the ability is utilized more of an attack, which goes in line with his inherent properties of transmuting matter into gold, as Adam is able to create gold after attacking the base holding the Gungnir files, as well as Carol transforming Shemha's outer physics, which is stated to be an ability that doesn't make sense and defies logic, as well as part of the Shenshojing's false robe into gold. However, Hibiki's case is the only one where the transmutation is actually used as a transformation. So what makes this case so special? We're told that Hibiki's transformation, as stated by Adam, is a transmutation completed by a person who isn't an alchemist. Now, while this may sound crazy as it makes it sound like Hibiki has the ability to outright perform alchemy, this isn't really the case, with the power only being an outcome of Hibiki using the power that built the Faust Robe of Saint Germain, something that had enough power to give all the users an X Drive level amp and strength with the S2CA as stated with Rebuild, in addition to being a power manifested by the Philosopher's Stone. Now this is the more interesting part, as the Philosopher's Stone is something that's seen to be something that led to this transformation. With this transformation, Hiiki is able to completely overpower Adam despite receiving the power of an X Drive level amp after absorbing the power of the Faust Robe from the Philosopher's Stone, with Golden Transmutation stating that the Symphogear was a combination of the strong wills of Prelati, Cagliostro, and Saint Germain, alongside the assistance of the other gear users that allowed Hiiki to move while grayscale. So it does stand to reason that the Philosopher's Stone does introduce a factor into Golden Transmutation, as even Amalgam, a golden power used by the gears in the following arc, is powered by upgraded Symphogears that were built with the Philosopher's Stone. Not only that, but it coincides with the statement of the Philosopher's Stone being able to burn away impurities, which is implied to have influenced the transformation, as it's stated to be the perfect version of Hiiki. As for how strong you believe this form is, this ultimately does base itself on what you believe is the interpretation of the keyword for Golden Transmutation, and that's why this seems so interesting to scale and why people in the community are so divisive on it. Via said keyword, the most we can interpret is that this is the perfect version of Hiiki, with her receiving a power increase strong enough to go from base all the way to scaling above the characters with the X Drive amps. Now there are various, and I mean various, interpretations on what you could put Golden Hiiki at in this transformation, but there are primarily two different interpretations you can go off of. The first is that this Golden Hiiki is just above the divine energy that Adam tried to capture, with this scaling her to base Hiiki at the start of XV, and the second is that this is the strongest that she will ever be in the story, putting her far above Hiiki in XV, including Amalgam and Burning X Drive, each with their own multipliers and scaling to whatever her base was. I'll give a section to each different interpretation, as well as give what I believe is a correct scaling after everything regarding a hypothetical Golden Hiiki as a whole. The first interpretation would simply be that Golden Hiiki is the perfect version of Hiiki at that point in time. This interpretation has a decent amount of evidence, considering the fact that Hiiki was strong enough to pretty much solo Adam, despite the Symphogear users not being able to land a single decisive blow on him, despite having the X Drive level amp on top of their stats. In addition, this would also be a Hiiki with the remaining power of all the other X Drive amps that the other characters got up to this point, which makes sense as to how she was stated to be able to completely overwhelm Adam, as she was struggling to move in grayscale, only for the users to give their power to Hiiki and allow her to move. There is an argument that this was her armed gear, as it has the power to connect people and draw phonic gain, but the fact that Tsubasa was able to give her power without the need to the S2CA implies that this wasn't solely the armed gear. However, a primary reason would be that these characters in XV are just basically confirmed to be stronger than they were against Adam, including Hiiki, as Hiiki does have the most in solo feats against the Coffin, as Adam stated that he needed the divine energy to destroy the Coffin, and Hiiki was kind of just able to parry it and send it flying throughout the fight by herself. While all 6 of the Symphogear users did defeat the Coffin together, the fact that Hiiki was able to tank several attacks and had an implication of being nerfed while underwater and was still able to fight the Coffin on even ground should note that this was supposed to be a Hiiki that is monumentally stronger than any of her previous versions. However, we do end up getting a better scale of it, as Hiiki is pretty much confirmed to only be stronger than right after the X Drive buff, not just Golden Transmutation. As Rebuild does state that it was the gears rebuilt to have the same power as the X Drive buff, not just an increase with Golden Transmutation, as even characters without Golden Transmutation were able to damage Adam after the buff. However, there are also issues with this interpretation, such as us not really knowing how easy the fight was against Adam as a whole for the other users. Now obviously this is what this video is for, but the thing is that while I praise the keywords for giving us a ton of information, the only thing we get on the fight against Adam and Golden Transmutation is that Hiiki completely overwhelmed him, meaning that it could have potentially been a no-diff fight, and Golden Transmutation is vastly stronger than multiple X Drives worth of power. However, the fact that Hiiki still detransformed after she used Testament from Adam's explosion could mean that the form isn't vastly stronger, just strong enough to be at least an X Drive level amp or slightly above it. However, this ultimately just makes more sense narratively, as the users are intended to be stronger than the end of AXZ characters with their regular X Drive amps from the Philosopher's Stone from the Adam fight post rebuild, which is confirmed not just by them defeating the Coffin, but also the keyword stating that the gears were rebuilt and upgraded with the Philosopher's Stone. The other interpretation is that Golden Hibiki is the perfect version of Hibiki in general, including any version of Hibiki that we do see after. This interpretation is under the assumption that the term of perfect version does include all the versions of Hibiki being past, present, and future, and that any version of Hibiki after the initial transformation of Golden Transmutation is still weaker than AXZ. We do have some supporting evidence for exactly how this could work, as Hibiki and the others are considered to be weaker as stated by Noble Red, and the Symphogear users stating that Saint Germain and the others are stronger than Noble Red. Even if you do take the fact that they have already lost Ignite, they're still vastly stronger than their previous versions, as they do already scale to the divine energy that Adam was going to use to destroy the coffin holding Shamha's Vambrace, as they fought and destroyed that coffin in their base with upgraded gears. Even if you do say that Hibiki doesn't scale to said divine power at this point, she is directly stated to have a blatant upgrade in power after the gears are rebuilt, so they should be at the very least relative to Baphomet Adam, though it does stand to reason that they are above this Adam, which is basically confirmed by Adam himself, stating that he needed the divine energy to stand on the level of the gods, and Genjiro stating that the Adam needed the energy to destroy the coffin, implying that he couldn't just do it himself. This XV Hibiki would end up getting massively stronger, going so far as to get Amalgam and Burning X Drive, each being their own multipliers in a power of around 1,000 and 35 billion times respectively, and they would still struggle to fight against Shamha with 6 other people on that same level, with Shamha being someone who is so powerful that she has the ability to utilize outer physics, an ability to overwrite matter that is even stated to make no sense in the guide, as well as being able to fight against Carol in base, someone who even Genjiro believes the Symphogear users would need to plan against, despite having Amalgam and this being a weaker Carol utilizing less energy than the fight against Shamha. Basically, if we take this interpretation of perfect Hibiki, this Golden Transmutation transformation would be so strong that Golden Hibiki would pretty much be able to fight evenly, if not mid to low diff Shamha, as this perfect version should still have access to everything Hibiki had during this fight, like Metanoia and being relative to or above Burning X Drive, as Burning X Drive is essentially just an X Drive activated by listening to the song within her heart. And that's not to mention that she would have a planetary wide scale of Gungnir cancellation at her fingertips. However, there are some issues with this interpretation, such as those statements about the Bavarian Illuminati that I had mentioned previously. With these statements, something that tends to come up is the strength of Noble Red as a whole. And while I'm not going to say, oh, these characters are the strongest alchemists in the verse, their statements, as I have went over previously in other Symphogear videos, do appear to be a bit conflicting, seeing as how Malark's statement about the cast being weaker without Ignite was pretty much implying that Ignite would have been something monumental in any other fights, alongside Saint Germain being stated to be stronger than them. It's just implied that Ignite was more of a factor here than something else like X Drive, let alone Golden Transmutation. Plus, this would imply that Hibiki would have believed that Saint Germain would be able to contend with Golden Transmutation, but we all know how their fight with Ignite went. On top of this, these are base characters who surpassed Adam prior to the actual first episode of XV, someone whose explosion was so strong that Tsubasa needed to shield Hibiki from it, despite her being in this powerhouse state. Like I said before, we do only see this transformation once, but it kind of just makes more sense for the transformation to be similar to an X Drive amp or something slightly higher than it, as it's more congruent to the story, as the user's bases would be higher than whatever they need to be Adam at the end of said arc. As for what I believe to be the correct scaling and interpretation, I lean more towards the first interpretation for a few reasons. As I provide with the reasons from the first interpretation, it just makes more sense narratively that this form is just Hibiki's maximum at AXZ rather than her maximum in Symphogear as a whole. Not only is it shown through the actions and statements within the series itself, but it's also provided through outside sources without fallible narrators. I mean, unless you think the creators of the show are wrong about what they made, but okay, you do you, bud. Ultimately, Golden Transmutation is around at the very least a 5 X Drives level amp in power, potentially even higher depending on how badly you think Hibiki whooped Adam. There is the potential that it is vastly higher, something I am not denying, like hundreds of X Drives amps worth of increases, but we have no further evidence aside from, oh, Hibiki couldn't move before, now she can. As much as I would like to say that Golden Hibiki is stronger than Burning X Drive, there just isn't enough evidence to support aside from the interpretation of the phrase perfect version. Any interpretation of that phrase would be completely headcanon regardless, but this headcanon is the most consistent in the form of headcanons. However, like I said, there are various forms of interpretation for this form. You could say it's 5 X Drives worth of an amp, you could say it's a static increase to put her up to Universal Plus, because a perfect Hibiki would have tanked the Nephilim Blast to destroy the Treasury of Babylon. You could pretty much say anything that is above X Drive, but the key point in this argument is that we know that it is the level of, if not higher than 5 X Drives worth of power. If you do want to put it at an exact amount, this is the best spot to throw it in, mainly because, like I said, the amps from the other 5 users users, in addition to the users already being able to harm Adam in their respective X-Drive amps, means that it just being a single X-Drive would be too low, in addition to this not being just an insanely higher multiplier, since even with amalgam and rebuild gears and knowledge of this golden transmutation, Genjiro states that they would still need to plan to deal with a reborn Carol, implying that Golden Hibiki may not even be strong enough to fight against this Carol who scaled not only to everyone in Burning X-Drive, but more importantly to base Shemha, someone who was much stronger than the amped Noble Red that required amalgam to defeat. I'll eventually make a dedicated Carol video which will really put into perspective exactly why Carol's mentions are so crazy, but right now, just to give us a power level, Carol is able to give 5 of the 6 Symphogear users X-Drive after singing on 2 separate occasions, but it does make sense to give Golden Transmutation around a 5 X-Drives worth of increase in power. Likewise, we would also assume that speed also scales to this, since Hibiki was just blatantly hopping and dodging Adam's attacks, but that one is completely up to speculation. Thank you for watching my comprehensive guide to scaling Golden Transmutation, and definitely not me reaching for conclusions because I have nothing better to do video. Obviously, if you couldn't tell, I like this series a lot. God, I love Symphogear, Jesus Christ. So there will obviously be more talking about Mecha Musume fighting with the power of song. There are several, like I didn't even know I had this many things I wanted to talk about in this series, holy. Things I want to go over, so instead of simply dropping them all at once, I will trickle them out slowly, especially since this announcement for whatever new media we'll be getting hasn't given us anything yet. So while I do go over different Mahou Shoujo topics, you will also see more Symphogear videos. Ultimately, this video is a more different way of power scaling if you couldn't tell, but it's something that I've seen several times over, and even going over it, it was something that was certainly interesting to think about, as it brings forth a lot more implications down the line, just like every other hypothetical Symphogear topic. I'm sure someone will give me some random XDU event that explains everything, but I'll say that I'll get to XDU scaling eventually. I did also want to make this video relating to everyone going over the entire hype of Golden Transmutation as a whole, as when you really get into a conversation like this, someone will always bring this up as an end-all be-all argument. But it's kind of like Gojo's Infinity, where someone will just go, you know, that power is strong, but Gojo has Infinity, so neg diff. Anyways, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, or if you hated the video, give me an X-Drive level dislike and tell me why my Symphogear scaling sucks, and as always, ciao.
今ここで限界を超えろ。それしか道はねえ。俺たち金色の夜明け団だ。クローバー王国最強の魔法騎士団だ。